Thank you for joining us and welcome. This is a special report from the Law&Crime Network, and I'm Brian Ross, Chief Investigative Correspondent for the network. And for our viewers on Facebook Live and YouTube Live, a special report to answer your questions and issues that have arisen because of the COVID-19 crisis that is sweeping our country. Even today, as Governor Cuomo of New York said, he sees glimmers of hope. There are still many issues that will remain long after the crisis has abated. Questions about your job, your home, your finances, your health, and your rights. And to answer these questions, we have two esteemed lawyers to join us. First, from New York, Bruce Barquette, a criminal defense lawyer, and also from New York, from her home in Brooklyn, Susan Kelman. Susan and Bruce, thank you both for being here. And Susan, let me start by asking you, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, hanging in there, working around the clock.
And Bruce, how about for you?
We're doing well, thank you. Everybody is healthy, thankfully, and things are okay. Our office is operating at half staff. We let people go alternate working at home and working in the office every other day to keep the crowd thin, if you will.
Well, Bruce and Susan, we have a wide variety of questions. And Bruce, let me start with a first one for you. Can I be forced to work if my employer at my grocery store won't provide me with a face mask or gloves? Bruce?
Well, you can't be forced to work, but if the regular rules still apply. If you're an essential business and you're supposed to go to work and you're refusing to go, you run the risk of some sanction. On the other hand, the employer is obligated to provide you with a safe work environment. So the same way they couldn't force you to work if there was a fire in the building, let's say, or it was smoke or some kind of contaminant, they can't force you to work where you're being exposed to a deadly virus like corona. So same rules apply, just have to apply it to this particular set of facts.
Bruce and Susan, I know you both represent people charged with crimes who end up in prison. And so far in the federal prisons, there have been 240 federal inmates who have tested positive for the coronavirus and 73 staff members of the Bureau of Prison, with 8 deaths of federal prisoners. Susan, let me ask you, a lot of questions coming in. Here's one from a man whose wife is behind bars in Florida. Listen to what his question is and then give us an answer.
Hi, this is Mark Broder. I'm here on behalf of my wife, who is an inmate at the FCC Coleman Women's Camp facility in Sumter, Florida. I'm reaching out to try and find out what can be done to prevent the outbreak at this facility. And my wife has already been tested positive with Legionella disease, which was running rampant through the facility since the beginning of this year, and this just compounds our concerns. We'd like to know what rights we have, what rights she has, what we can do.
So, Susan, what rights does his wife have? What rights do the federal inmates have?
Well, federal inmates don't really have any rights, but there is recourse, and that's what we're working on day and night. It sounds like his wife might be what they call a vulnerable inmate, and inmates who are vulnerable are being assessed first and foremost. So people with any kind of underlying disease, asthma, diabetes, stroke, things like that. Those people are all being moved onto a list where they should be getting either immediate attention or quarantined, or getting them out of there, because they are the most vulnerable. And it sounds like his wife might fall into that category. So the first thing to do is, I guess, find out whether or not she's been designated a vulnerable individual. And a lot of the vulnerable individuals are being moved to what they call home detention. I don't know if his wife is sounds like she's a sentence prisoner, but the question is how much longer she has on her sentence. And then we have something called compassionate
Susan, from what you know,
there is something called.
And Susan, from what you know, what are the conditions like now?
They're horrific. They're horrific. I mean, I can't speak to Coleman, but I can tell you that the MDC in Brooklyn and the MCC in Manhattan, they're grotesque. They're medieval. I've one client who's in a dormitory with 26 other inmates. There are bunk beds virtually attached to each other. There is 26 inmates, one toilet, one urinal, one sink, no showers. And they've brought people in and out who have tested positive. And that's the other big thing is there's virtually no testing. I mean, unless you're having trouble breathing, nobody's getting a test. As close as they get to testing is taking your temperature. It's really a nightmare in both of those institutions.
Let me
Bruce
add.
Marquette, let me ask you, are you having any success in getting various clients of yours out of prison?
We've had some success with compassionate release, some success on bail for pretrial people. And so, but it's case by case, client by client. We need a systemic approach. I'll mirror what Susan said. I just got off the phone about an hour ago with one of my clients at MCC, and what he describes as the conditions there are nothing less than horrific. It is individuals locked in their cells, very little food, no medical treatment, no contact with the outside world, multiple people sick, no testing, no showers or showers once every few weeks. It is an unbelievable place to be on a good day. And MCC has been locked down now for a couple of months because they had a security issue. Supposedly a corrections officer brought a gun into the facility. So they've been locked in their cells for a better part of 2 months with very little access to the outside world. This is a client I normally see once every week or 10 days. I haven't seen him since February. There's a real problem in our local federal holding facilities that requires the attention, not of one or two lawyers, but of the entire bar association to deal with.
And Bruce, another question from one of our viewers who sent in a question. Listen to this and give an answer if you could.
Hi, my name is Beverly Humphreys, and I'm from Lakeland, Florida. I have many concerns about the federal prison located in Coleman, Florida, Coleman Correctional. I have a loved one who's housed at the women's camp for low security, and currently I'm hearing reports of guards not wearing masks or gloves. I'm also hearing reports from my loved one of women being called out to work in the morning. One of the questions I have is why are the guards and the staff at Coleman not using gloves and face masks when interacting with these women? Second of all, I'm wondering why are they called to work for the same reasons at Unicor? I'm also wondering why the media is not allowed to actually interview or speak to any of these inmates to see what's going on inside there.
Well, let me take
I could answer some of that. The media has really restrictions about, Bruce, let me say the media has a hard time getting through to talk to inmates there. I've tried to do it myself, and the inmates get in trouble. Maybe you can answer the rest of the question, Bruce.
Sure. Look, the reason why the media has a hard time accessing clients or individuals in prisons, the same reason the lawyers are having a difficult time right now speaking to their clients, is because the federal corrections facilities don't want the public at large to know what's actually going on. And I would raise a question, not just why aren't the guards wearing masks and gloves? Why aren't masks and gloves being distributed to the inmates? Both in the MCC and the other local state facilities that I've had an opportunity to speak to our clients about, they don't have any cleaning supplies. They don't have any hand sanitizers. They don't have masks. They don't have gloves. And there's not any additional cleaning that's being done by the staff to try to disinfect common areas. It's a real and present dangerous problem for people that are incarcerated now. There should be a rallying cry going up to try to protect these most vulnerable individuals in our society. And those people, they can't do this for themselves. They can't social distance from their cellmate. They can't clean things without supplies. They can't wear masks unless they're given to them. We need to do something about the prisons, not just in Coleman, but all across the country.
And Bruce and Susan, let me quickly ask you, do prisoners have any legal recourse? Can you go to court on their behalf with these issues?
That's a great question, Brian, because we are in court right now. In the Eastern District of New York, the Office of the Federal Defender has brought a class action against the institution, against the MDC specifically, and they're using as part of the class 4 or 5 vulnerable inmates who should have by now been released. They have serious health concerns, and nothing is happening to them. So the Federal Office of the Federal Defender has brought a class action on behalf of all vulnerable inmates across the country, and they're seeking to have the class certified. But in the meantime, they're asking for a temporary restraining order against just these particular individuals, and trying to get them the BLP to force them out of the institution immediately, because all of them have serious underlying conditions, asthma, heart conditions, high blood pressure, and none of them are getting any medical attention at all. In the Attorney General's initial memo about getting people out, he said that medical care was readily available. And I think everybody knows now that that's not the case. The doctors don't want to come in, and nobody has any protective gear. Nobody has any cleaning supplies. Nobody really wants to be in there. So they have brought this class action, and hopefully that'll get somebody some relief soon. Well, we're hoping.
All right, Susan, if you're just joining us, you're watching a special report from the Law and Crime Network on your rights and your questions in relation to the COVID-19 virus sweeping the country. What are your rights for your jobs, your homes? And one of the questions that will come up is what happens to the backlog in the courts? Many people are talking about a new virtual justice system. And to join us and talk about that is Judge Sohail Mohammed, who's a state superior court judge in New Jersey. Mohammed, thanks for being here. First, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Brian, and how are you and your family?
We're all well here. The Law and Crime family continues to operate. Let me ask you, all the lawyers we're talking to, lots of questions about a huge backlog that's going to be in place when the courts finally do get back in business. What's the plan for that?
Well, the plan is as follows, Brian. This public health crisis has given this opportunity, and that is important institution. One of the important institutions of our government is the judiciary. While we are focused at the present time in the state of New Jersey and other states in the court system with emergent issues, but yes, as these issues are coming up, the plan is within a week or so, most of our courts will be operating what we consider non-emergent applications. I mean, over 90% of our judiciary, judges, staff, are working remotely. So that's 90% of our workforce is right now working remotely.
Does that mean essentially it's a virtual court system?
It's a virtual court system. It's a real court system. The only difference is physically we're not together, but everything else is, we're doing it in what we do in the real courtroom.
And aren't there things, though, you can't do if you're not all in the same place? Don't defendants have a right to be in court, have a right to jury trials, et cetera? Are defendants, in any case that you know of, asking for bench trials in which the judge would rule, not the jury?
Yes, there are cases with bench trials. For instance, last week, one of our judges had a case, bench trial, and the bench trial was from the beginning to the end concluded at a virtual courtroom.
All by the Zoom app or some other similar
yep, that's what
networking?
Yeah, New Jersey courts were using the Zoom app. And the beauty of these application is, Brian, is, whether it's Zoom, whether it's Skype, whatever these applications may be, the sheer nature of the technology such that, I tell my litigants and attorneys who have never used the virtual courtroom, I tell them, if you can use your cell phone to dial out, if you can use your smartphone to check an email and an attachment, you're in. You're 90% into a virtual court participant.
But Judge, is there something that's lost by not being in person?
Of course there is something lost, the physical touch. As human beings, we want to be together. We want to be able to observe. We want to be able to sense what a person is feeling by looking at this. But the reality is, the nation's world has changed now. World has evolved. And certainly those issues are addressed by judges. For instance, you can have a hearing, you can have a what I would consider a motion that you're considering, but you have all these virtual cameras, virtual presence that you have. You're getting a much closer view of a witness who's testifying than you would be sitting maybe 2 feet away from you.
All right. Well, Judge Sohail Mohammed, thank you so much. Continue to do the great work and be safe.
My pleasure, Brian, and same to you and your families. Thank you.
And Bruce Burkett, let me ask you, what's going to be the case with a virtual court system? Are rights going to be trampled on because of that?
Well, look, the courts are doing the best that they can, I think, but rights are being trampled on right currently as we speak. Individuals who remain incarcerated through this period of time are having their speedy trial rights suspended indefinitely. I understand we can't do jury trials at this point in time, given the crisis, but the option is not to keep people locked up indefinitely while we're waiting for jury trials to come back. Society has to deal with the fact that we have competing rights. And one of the things that we should be looking at pretty heavily is a reduction in our pre-trial detention incarceration rate. There's no reason why a number of these individuals in the state and federal system can't be released pending trial. And as far as virtual courts go, the New York state system is still operating only on an emergency basis. They're only doing emergency applications or new arrests. So the regular process of conferences, plea negotiations, guilty pleas, motions, hearings are not taking place at all, which puts the entire system in a standstill. And when we restart this, there is going to be a rush of cases that are going to head towards trial or other forms of litigation. And I'm not sure how the system will handle that backlog.
That's a very good point. Susan, a question from one of our viewers following up on our conversation. If some of the inmates have tested positive, are they being let out early so they don't spread it to other inmates? Susan?
No, the answer is no, they're not. And it's also being done on a case-by-case basis. So last week I went to 2 judges and I said, and when I said went, I mean virally, virtually, went to 2 judges and explained the situation. And both of those clients, ultimately the government consented to one, but both of those clients were released to home detention. So that was a big improvement. But in terms of there being an overall plan in place for how to deal with that situation, there just is not. I mean, this is a ticking time bomb because there is no way to isolate people. Remember, and we've talked about this before, Brian, the MCC was built to hold 750 inmates, as was the MDC. They have more than double that and close to triple that. So you have people just on top of each other. They don't have the facilities. They don't have the staff. Now the staff is getting sick. Nobody's being tested. The only way to handle this is to get as many people out of there as possible. And that's not an easy task. And there, I wanted to say something about the court system because the federal courts have been incredibly responsive to this and getting online and getting us able to do virtually everything, not trials, but certainly these motions to get people out, compassionate leave, those kinds of things. But the jail, again, has been so deficient in getting us the ability to have our clients join the conversations. I mean, all they have to do is put them in front of a camera. They don't respond to our requests. They don't respond to the court's requests. I mean, I had a client who should have, I hoped, been out of jail yesterday, and now it's being put over for another week just to see if we can get the MDC to bring the person to a phone so that he can participate in the call so the judge can rule. And nothing's happening. The courts are working, the U.S. Attorney's Office is working, the defense lawyers are working, but the MDC and the MCC are just, it's like they've thrown their hands up.
So far, Bruce and Susan, 31 Bureau of Prison facilities have inmates who have tested positive for the coronavirus. Bruce, is there a gross negligence here that could lead to a lawsuit against the Bureau of Prisons? Is that practical? Is that possible?
Well, it's certainly something that the people are going to take a hard look at when the dust settles. But Susan's absolutely right when she said earlier that there's no testing going on. You say there's 31 facilities with people in it. I would bet it's 100%. They just haven't done the testing. There's no way in God's green earth, forgive me, that people inside these prisons are not being impacted by this virus that seems to be so contagious. There's very little testing that's been done at MCC and MDC, and I think deliberately so. It's continued part of what the officials do, which is stick their head in the sand and hope nobody else looks. They don't want to know who's sick because they don't know how to deal with them. And for whatever reason, the option of common sense. If someone has a virus, get them the heck out of a situation where they can contaminate hundreds of other individuals, including guards. And there's a resistance to do that, just natural resistance. We don't want to let people out of jail as if somehow that's a cardinal sin that we can't violate. We have to face the fact that there's going to be real problems. People are going to die as a result of what's being done or not being done now.
And as we've been talking, we're talking about federal prisons. Who knows what's going on in the 50 states where their prisons are not even as good as the federal prisons. For instance, we know Harvey Weinstein tested positive for the virus at a prison in upstate New York, a state prison. Susan, it must be just as bad there, if not worse, at the state prisons.
I imagine that it is. I can't speak to the state prisons because I practice exclusively in the federal system, but I can't imagine that it's any better, especially in remote upstate areas where it's hard to get medical attention if you're not in jail. The limit of physicians available and other healthcare staff, but also whether it's the state or the federal, nobody's taking care of the people who are incarcerated, and nobody's taking care of the people who are supposed to take care of them. Which is why, as Bruce said before, they're not even being fed. They get a pound, pounds of food thrown in. It's frozen food. It may take 24 hours to defrost in their unit. But nobody's cooking, nobody's doing anything. These people are really surviving on instinct and what they can, what they can grab. There's really no words for it.
Okay. All right, Susan, thank you very much. Susan Kelman in New York and Bruce Marquette in New York, thank you very much for being here. Jesse Weber will be here tomorrow at 2 o'clock. We'll be back on Friday at 2. And from the whole Law and Crime team, a special wish to all of our viewers who will be celebrating the first night of Passover tonight. We wish you peace, health, and happiness. This is Brian Ross. Thanks for joining us. Good afternoon, and stay safe.